I don't know what we can talk about in this nation without talking about white superiority, honestly.
Who defines the meaning of God also defines the relationship between economy and God.
African Americans spent $1.3 trillion last year, making us the 16th wealthiest nation in the world. Why have we not turned those riches into wealth to develop our community?
From your understanding and from your knowledge and your background, can you please explain or elaborate on the African presence in ancient America?
All right. That's a foundational question, we might say. That's the question. One thing is that there are many African presences in ancient America. I think that there's a tendency to act as though the Black presence in these various parts of the world is monolithic, but you have a series of migrations or movements, some voluntary, some involuntary. You have African people as the first people to settle on the shores of the Western Hemisphere, tens of thousands of years ago. You have, for example, in Brazil, the remains of an ancient African woman called Lucia, after Lucy or Dinknesh in Ethiopia. These are the skeletal remains of an African woman who lived in Brazil at least 11,000 years ago and probably more. So you have, as we indicated at the beginning, African people as the first people in the Americas. One of the things Ivan Van Sertima used to say, Runoko, it's one thing to say that you were first, but it's quite a different thing to say what you did. And so the next phase we can look at is the role of African people in classical Mesoamerican civilization, especially among the Olmec, the parent civilization, and then the Maya, the Aztec, the Inca, essentially all of them. And then you have Africans who are captured and taken to the Americas against their will. I want to go back to that slide in a moment. Against their will. And even now, the movement continues. You know, you have Africans from the continent who are students, who are businessmen, who are in the Americas because Africa has been so raped and robbed and pillaged that many people leave Africa in search of a better life. And so what we are talking about now is the second phase, the classical period of American civilization, sometimes called Mesoamerica. Now, this head right here that you see in front of you is the head that was on Ivan Van Sertima's book that came before Columbus. And this is what we call, one of what we call the La Venta heads. Now, there are 20 of these heads, and no two of them look exactly the same. I'm the only person that I know who has seen and examined all 20 of these heads. Even when Ivan wrote the book that came before Columbus, which was published in 1977, only 14 of those heads have been identified. So they're still finding them. So go back to that picture and let's talk about it for a moment. Let's use that as an illustration. Can we see that head again? It looks a little bit like you, my brother. This is another one, but it's fine. We can use this as an example. The one I was using was the one that was on the cover of the Van Sertima book that came before Columbus. But this is located in the same area. There are 20 of these heads, and they are divided into 4 areas. The first 10 are from an area called San Lorenzo. San Lorenzo is important because it's the first settlement that we know of in the Americas. And so you have 10 of the heads from there. Of that site, only 1 is still there. 7 are in Jalapa, Mexico. 2 are in Mexico City. And then you have the La Venta heads, of which there are 7. La Venta is the second major Olmec site. 4 of the heads from La Venta, the best ones, have been moved to the neighboring state of Tabasco. La Venta is in Veracruz. In the 1950s, a Mexican oil company, I believe called Pemex, found oil here and decided to move the 4 best heads to Villahermosa, Mexico, in Tabasco. That's where this one is. And then you have 3 badly damaged heads that are still in La Venta. And then you have 2 heads from a place called Trezapotes. Trezapotes is the 3rd big Olmec site. And then you have 1 more from a place called Cobata. The Olmec are important to us because they are the parent civilization of the Americas. All the other civilizations come after the Olmec, the Aztec, the Inca, the Maya, the Toltec, the Teotihuacan people all come after the Olmec. And the Olmec, according to Ivan van Sertima, and I'm a disciple of that, had an African element inside it. Dr. van Sertima didn't say, and here he disagrees with some other scholars, that the Olmec were African. He said that at a certain time in history, a small group of Africans, a fleet of ships from the Nile Valley, sailed across the Atlantic and entered the Olmec world and turned it out. They showed how to move large objects in stone. They introduced calendars. They introduced major forms of advancements in agricultural science. And as a result of that, those Africans who came from the Nile Valley were given an exalted-like status. And this is the controversy, because many people would have us believe that our history only began with slavery. And I ain't having that. And Ivan didn't have that. This one right here is the one with the braids in the back. And this is one of the Tresepotes heads. And it's very, very powerful. As I say, no two of the heads look alike. They're scattered in Mexico City, in the state of Veracruz, and in the state of Tabasco, all 20 of them. Yeah, those are the braids. And this is the only one with braids. Now, we don't know who these Olmec heads represent. Leo Wiener, who I talked about at the beginning, who mentioned that he's the first scholar of any ethnic group that I'm aware of to really deal comprehensively with the African presence in ancient America. He believed, and this is astonishing, but we're talking 1920, 100 years ago, he believed that those heads represented slaves. One of those heads weighs 100,000 pounds. Even common sense would tell you that who would build a massive head, 100,000 pounds, for a slave, and the master is not represented. This is the first head that was identified. And this one was identified in the 1860s by a Mexican scholar named Jose Melgar, who said it looked Ethiopian. Now, this is in the 1860s. This is the first head that was identified, and this is one of the Tresepotes heads. The one with the braids is the companion head of this. Now, you would think, at least I would think, that just looking at these heads, you would say, there's a brother, there's a black man. But we have been so ingrained with a sense of inferiority, or the inferiority, the view, the general view, that many people think that black people never did anything, that even when you're looking at it, you are not able to digest what you are saying. I think that's called cognitive dissonance.
No, we're right on point with that. So with that, we talked about the Olmecs. Can you elaborate on some of the other civilizations in ancient America?
Well, the Olmec is rapidly followed by the Maya. And I'm going to do a presentation at the end of the month, but I wish in hindsight now, maybe we'll have to come back and do it again. I thought about another image I could show. I have like 100,000 photographs, all original pictures, amazing collection. And one of the images I have is from a Guatemalan temple, and I should have included it tonight. And it's a Mayan stela. It's a column. And on top of the column is an Olmec head. It's as though the Maya were acknowledging their Olmec ancestors and Olmec predecessors. And there is a black presence among the Maya too. I don't know if it is symbolic or it's ethnic or both. So the Maya really are big. The Olmec civilization is on the Gulf Coast of Mexico. The Mayan civilization is in southern Mexico, in the Yucatan Peninsula, in Chiapas, and also Guatemala and Belize. And then you have in Mexico itself, you have the next big civilization, which is called the Teotihuacan civilization. And the Teotihuacan, like the Olmec, were pyramid builders. And then, of course, after that, you have many other civilizations. You have the Toltec in Mexico. You have the Aztec, who were in power at the time the Spanish conquistadors come. But you also have what appears to be elements of African civilization in South America too, particularly in the civilization that preceded the Inca, which is called the Moche civilization. And the Moche is on the Pacific side of Peru. And there you also seem to have a very, very strong African presence there. It's impossible to deny.
Wow. So would it be possible to look at that in terms of dates to give us some type of context?
Very good, my brother. Olmec civilization begins about 2000 BC. about 4,000 years ago. And it seems to peak around 1200 or 1000 BC, okay? And that's when it was seen that the Africans entered the Olmec world. One of the scholars that I mentioned, Alexander von Woutenau, the author of the book Unexpected Faces in Ancient America, which is well worth having even now. I really highly recommend it. Wonderful photographs. He said that everybody came to America before Columbus, but of all the people who came, the African exercised the most decisive influence. He said, when the African first came to the Americas, he did not come as slave, he came as master of his own destiny. And I think that that pretty much sets the guidelines. But in all of these civilizations, Aztec, Olmec, Maya, Toltec, Zapotec, Teotihuacan, you can find something that is very, very African in appearance. It's just that it hasn't really been effectively explored. We've had a few pioneers. What's sad about it, maybe the saddest thing, this is the San Lorenzo head, the 10th San Lorenzo head. One of the saddest things is that it's not taught in the schools of Mexico. So African Mexicans, of which there are millions, have the lowest self-esteem of just about any group of African folk I've encountered. I've been to 125 countries. I've been with indigenous Australians. I've been with the Batwa of Central Africa. I've been with Dravidians. I've been with the Dalits. I've been with the Untouchables. The Black folk in Mexico and in Hispanic America in general have about the lowest self-esteem of any group of Black folk I've encountered. All they really know is that they were slaves, okay? And so it seems to me that with this information about the ancient African presence in the Americas, that would give them a much greater self-esteem. But the government of Mexico does not use this in the curriculum. And the greatest opposition that I find when I'm doing lectures or writing about the African presence in the Olmec world are from Mexicans themselves, who seem to have the attitude, many of them, that we, when I say we, I mean the African-centered scholars, are attempting to take away their civilization, just as they say Nile Valley civilization has been taken away from us. That's very distressing to me, because again, the first person to identify an Olmec head in the Americas and say it looked African was a Mexican scholar. But I mean fierce opposition when it comes to talking about that today. As long as you're talking about slavery, you're on safe ground. Not many people are going to challenge you, especially if you're not talking about resistance to slavery. I don't want to minimize the suffering of our ancestors, but we did more than suffer. We fought back.
Yes.
But when you begin to talk about African people out of those traditional roles of servants and slaves, oh, brother, it's just fierce opposition. And if I'm running into this today in 2020, you know what Ivan Van Sertima ran into in the 1970s and 1980s. So in that sense, he is a true pioneer and trailblazer, and I miss him a great deal.
Right. Wow. So we look at the Olmec civilization. You said it comes about 4,000 years ago. It began to flourish around 1000 BC with the emergence of the African presence.
Yes.
Were these civilizations flourishing simultaneously? Like, was the Olmecs and the Mayans going on around the same time?
The Mayan began to emerge towards the end of the Olmec phase. So let's say Olmec civilization is from around 2000 BC. It reaches its height around 1200 BC, the first major phase of Olmec civilization. And this is the San Lorenzo phase, which is in existence for about 500 years. And then from about 800 BC to about 500 BC, you have the Levanta phase. The Levanta phase is interesting because here you have the first pyramid in the Americas. And then the third phase of Olmec civilization is the Trezepotes phase, which is from around 500 BC to about 100 BC. Now, at the same time, towards the end of that period, the Maya are beginning to rise up. And the Mayan civilization goes back, I'd say you could trace it to 500 BC. It reaches its height about 500 years into the Christian era, and it is still kicking at the time the conquistadors come. And the other civilizations kind of exist simultaneously. In the Americas, Teotihuacan civilization comes after the Olmec in Mexico. And then after that, I think you have the Zapotec. and then the Toltec, and then finally the Aztec. In Peru, the country in South America I know most about in terms of African civilization, the Mochica or Moche civilization begins around 800 BC, and it lasts for about 500 years. And the civilization of the people of Peru in pre-Columbian times comes to an end with the Inca, who are only here for a short time, from about 1300 to about 1500. Yeah.
Okay. There's something you said, I'm sure the audience is just chomping at the bits to know more about it. The first pyramid in America.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the pyramid, where it's located, who built it, and so forth?
Well, interestingly enough, I've not found any evidence of pyramids in the San Lorenzo phase of Olmec civilization. The pyramid, the first pyramid in the, and there are a lot of pyramids in the Americas, but first we also need to talk about what is a pyramid.
Yes.
What we find in the Olmec world at the city of La Venta, which is really a small town now, is the first true pyramid in the Americas. It's not very big, but it's spread out. I would say it's about 150 feet high. It would be smaller than the step pyramid of Djoser, designed by Imhotep at Saqqara. And so that's the first pyramid. And anybody can go there and see it. Sometimes people say, Runoko, why don't we know more about our history? And I would say because we're not doing the hard work. You cannot expect the same people or the descendants of the same people who enslaved and colonized you to teach you your history. That's our job, and that's our responsibility. And it seems like we are waiting on somebody to do it for us. The information is there. We just have to follow up. We just have to go dig. We have to make knowledge of self a greater priority than we do, I think, at this point.
So, that first pyramid, would that have been constructed in Olmec or Mayan?
Olmec, certainly.
Olmec.
It's an Olmec pyramid. Okay.